Good evening. Welcome to this October 3rd, 2022 meeting of the Norfolk City Council. We'll call the meeting to order and call your attention to the Open Meetings Act posted here in the council chambers. If you now please join me in rising for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call please.
Granquist.
Here.
Arns.
Here.
Merrill.
Here.
McCarthy.
Here.
Murin.
Here.
Jackson.
Here.
Clausen.
Here.
Hildebrand.
Here.
Okay, with that, I would look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So move. Second.
Motion second. If no discussion, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Then entertain a motion to approve the full agenda.
So move. Second.
Motion and second. If no discussion, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
All right, that takes us to item number 16 on the council agenda under special presentations. We have two proclamations tonight. The first is Fire Prevention Week, proclaiming October 9th through the 15th as Fire Prevention Week. The proclamation reads as follows: whereas the City of Norfolk is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting Norfolk, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at greatest risk from fire, and whereas home fires caused 2,580 civilian deaths in the U.S. in 2020, according to the National Fire Protection Association, and fire departments in the U.S. responded to 356,500 home fires, and whereas smoke alarms sense smoke well before you can, alerting you to danger in the event of a fire, in which you may have as little as 2 minutes to escape safely, and whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half, and whereas Norfolk residents should be sure everyone in the home understands the sounds of the smoke alarms and knows how to respond, and whereas Norfolk residents that are responsive to public education measures are better able to take personal steps to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes, and whereas the 2022 Fire Prevention Week theme, Fire Won't Wait, Plan Your Escape, effectively serves to remind us of the importance of having a home fire escape plan. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Josh Moaning, Mayor of the City of Norfolk, do hereby proclaim October 9th through 15th, 2022 as Fire Prevention Week in the City of Norfolk, and urge all citizens to plan and practice a home fire escape for Fire Prevention Week 2022 and to support the many public safety activities and efforts of Norfolk's fire and emergency services. So I see we have a number of members of the Norfolk Fire Division here this evening, and I believe we also have the Norfolk Morning and Noon Optimist Clubs here to recognize a member of the Norfolk Fire Division. So I would ask them to come forward and then also to receive the proclamation. Are there Optimist Club members here? Yes. Okay. And Chief Raggi, yes, please come forward. Thank you. Mark, you say a few words? Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Mark Clausen. I'm the president of the Norfolk Noon Optimist Club. When Optimist Clubs were formed back in 1919, they established 5 purposes for an Optimist Club. One of those was to inspire and respect for law. And that continues to be one of the programs that Optimist Clubs everywhere promote. And here in Norfolk, we choose to do that by recognizing first responders, who are out there on the line protecting us every day. And back in August at National Night Out, we had the opportunity to recognize police officer and trooper. And we're here today to recognize someone from the Norfolk Fire Division. And I'd like to read a short piece. It was written by Brock Soderberg, this nomination. I would like to nominate firefighter paramedic Max Hessman for the Optimus Firefighter Award. Max has shown all of the qualities that we could ask for at Norfolk Fire, whether it be lending a hand, getting things done around the station, dedicating hours off duty to set up for shift trainings, having a semi-trailer donated to allow for never done before training, and most importantly, being passionate about our career. He has grown into an outstanding firefighter, paramedic, and leader. He can always be counted on to do the right thing. Even when facing his own life events, he is the backbone for many of us, a true testament of our brotherhood. Max's abilities to perform at a high level at all times, regardless of the task, is next to none. He has an incredible ability to make quick, decisive, and coordinated decisions on the fire ground, EMS incidents, or during trainings. These skills and traits have undoubtedly benefited our patients and our department. When work needs to be done, he has it done before anyone knows it needs to be done. If someone needs help outside of work, whether a coworker or stranger from Canada, he'll do whatever he can to make someone's day better. I'm truly proud of this guy, both as a supervisor and friend. He is a great asset to Norfolk Fire, and I believe he is the most deserving of this award. Even when he steps on a nail, he gives it his all. Max, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mark. We want to thank the Optimist Clubs for continuing this tradition of recognizing our fire division and police division employees on an annual basis like this. And thank you to the many members of the fire division who came out to support Max on his specific recognition. So congratulations, and thank you once again for your service. Moving on, we move to item number 18 on the agenda, and that is a proclamation recognizing October 13th through 16th, 2022 as Support Citizens with Intellectual Disabilities Week. The proclamation reads as such: whereas intellectual disabilities affect 1 out of every 10 families in America, over 50,000 Nebraskans, and whereas quality of life is important to all citizens of our city, including children and adults with intellectual disabilities, and whereas the Knights of Columbus is a charitable and fraternal organization that promotes the dignity and welfare of citizens with intellectual disabilities, now, therefore, I, Josh Moaning, Mayor of the City of Norfolk, by the power vested in me, do hereby proclaim the week of October 13th through 16th, 2022 as Support Citizens with Intellectual Disabilities Week in the City of Norfolk, and encourage citizens to take note of this observance. Is there anyone here tonight to receive this proclamation? Okay, please come forward.
My name is Stephen Lowry. I serve as the Intellectual Disabilities Foundation Director for the Nebraska Knights of Columbus. This is Brian Hammock. He is our state program director. He is from the Norfolk area, actually. Annually, we do a drive that we call a campaign for people with intellectual disabilities in the middle of October. You'll probably have seen the people handing out the Tootsie Rolls or other fundraisers that are associated with this. Last year, we raised about $75,000 to donate to nonprofit organizations across the state of Nebraska who serve people with intellectual disabilities, including Smile, that's out there in the Madison area that's nearby to you guys, with Patty here as well to represent. ARC, Mosaic, and many other qualifying organizations on that. We have our drive coming up again in just a couple weeks, the 13th through 16th, so if you see those going on, please feel free to take part in that. And know that that money is all being turned right back around to people who need those funds and serve those funds here in the state of Nebraska and the Norfolk area. Thank you, guys.
And we want to recognize the Knights for bringing this proclamation forward to our attention and sponsoring it, and also local organizations like Smile who are here tonight that support our citizens with intellectual disabilities. So thank you for being here. That moves us to item number 19 on our regular agenda. With this, I would look for a motion to consider ordinance number 5805 to amend section 2-5 of the city code to update ambulance fees, to update alarm fees, to update building, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing permit fees, to update subdivision plat approval fees, to update garbage and trash fees, to update water, sewer, stormwater, and wastewater rates and fees, to update zoning district map and conditional use permit fees, to update overnight camping fees, and include a fee for miscellaneous recreational programs.
All to offer for consideration ordinance number 5805.
Motion and a second, and to hear some background on this, we'll hear from Andy Colvin, our city administrator.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Well, as the Mayor just read, this ordinance is fairly self-explanatory. This is a fee ordinance that we adopt annually. This is a budgetary related item. At the last meeting, if you remember, we did or the council did table an ordinance because we did want to take out and strike some of the changes to our recreational programming fees, specifically for the sports groups and the usage fees for our fields and things like that. We weren't quite ready to make some changes yet at this point. I think we're looking at delaying those either till later, early next year, or else maybe even the next budget year, which is something we've also discussed. So those have been taken out and removed, leaving with the remainder of the fees. So basically, I think Danny can walk through the procedure here, because you have two fee ordinances. I believe the first one, if you adopt that one, then the second one you would just vote no, I think is where that is. But Danny can walk you through the procedure there. But we do have division heads here. If there's any specific fees that you'd like to discuss or review or talk about, we'd be happy to do that with you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Any questions or discussion? Danny, do you want to walk through the process here?
So, Andy already spoke to it pretty much, but we have two similar ordinances on the agenda before you. This is a new one. This was not on the last agenda. However, the one following this one, that is the one that was on the last agenda that was tabled at the previous council meeting. So the one before you right now, this is an updated one. The anticipated effective date for this ordinance is October 4th. That would be assuming that this passed on all three readings tonight. And if you have specific questions, if you want to go into different line items, we have representatives from all the different divisions that can speak to those.
Okay.
I guess I got a comment from a local garbage collector or trash hauler that was questioning the fees year after year to the tonnage rate of the transfer station. So if anybody could comment on that, I'd appreciate.
We've had a couple significant increases over the last 3 years. Both of those are substantially related to the capital improvement project that's going on out there. The project did come in higher than was anticipated, but it was a project that, as presented to council, was considered to be an important improvement to our transfer station facilities, and so we did move that forward. As we sit here now at this rate, you know, it's going to be extremely desirable that we work as staff and at the transfer station to keep that rate at that level as long as we can. You know, that fee is made up of our tipping floor costs that we operate the tipping floor at, including the capital improvements there. That is about $54.80 of our fee. And then the other $24 portion of that fee is our gate fee for the Solid Waste Coalition landfill. So there's two components to that fee. We've been able to hold that $24 portion for the landfill fairly steady for many, many years. I can't promise that we're going to be able to hold our $54.80 going forward. I believe it's possible. You know, what we don't know is our tonnage fluctuates year to year. We have seen a little bit of a standstill on the tonnage. I don't exactly know where that tonnage is going, if people are hauling to other landfills. But from where we are, you know, if we can hold this position over the next 2, 3, 4 years, that would certainly be our goal.
I guess from the individual that had contacted me about this, he wanted to make sure that this was not only for the commercial side, but also it was gate fees for even the individuals coming into the facility and discarding their trash and garbage.
Individuals that come in generally don't, if they're coming in carrying, you know, something that's in a ton range, yes. If it's a mom and pop bringing in a truckload of stuff, there's a minimum fee that we charge for that, or if they're just bringing in a bag or two, there's a minimum fee. We are not increasing those individual fees right now as a part of this. This fee is just on that tipping floor fee. You know, there'll be some conversation probably going forward about just from a management perspective. You know, there's been some safety concerns out there. We've had some incidences out there. Most of those, in fact, all of those that I'm aware of, are related to individuals going up to the tipping floor either to drop off a bag or you know, a partial truckload of waste. If we can, you know, we'd prefer that to see people you know, work with our local waste haulers and have them come pick up trash and not be delivering bags and getting themselves up there into a you know, a potentially dangerous situation. You know, the tipping floor is an active working environment. There's a fairly large pit there. We've got equipment working in there. We make it as safe as we can, but again, we may be looking at a fee increase here at some point just to encourage people to use our haulers.
Thank you.
Steve, wasn't some of the idea of surrounding the work being done out at the transfer station to address safety issues out there?
It was, and this project certainly does do that. You know, having paved streets with signage, you know, it's easier to direct people. They know what they're doing. It's a cleaner environment for the staff to be working in. So rather than dust blowing into the tipping floor and in people's face when they're working, our staff is more able to focus on what's going on there. So, you know, just from an environment perspective, it's going to be easier for our staff to focus on the people that are actively dumping on the tipping floor. We have done some stuff with signage up there, and we're going to continue to monitor and make improvements as we see them.
Did some of that also involve, for lack of a better word, electric eyes and all that kind of thing to keep the public from going too far in there, getting close to the...
We do. We have installed cameras on the tipping floor. I don't know the exact number, but I would say there's probably around 8 or 9 cameras up there on the tipping floor. 18 cameras on the tipping floor now that are monitoring activity there. So.
And then that alerts the public to be aware? Or how,
It alerts the public to be aware. It also gives us the ability to, if there is an incident, just to see, exactly what happened, so that we can respond accordingly and try and put procedures in place, to avoid those situations in the future.
Okay.
I've got a question. Since we're dealing with like 7 different departments, why are all the departments lumped under a fee increase under one ordinance?
That, my understanding is this is how we've always had our fees presented.
Yeah,
I don't have a reason other than that's just the way it's always been structured for years. Councilman, if there's something we want to do differently and in subsequent years, we can.
Because you've got fire department, police department, transfer station, building permits, water, sewer, and parks and rec, all in one fee structures. And it's, in each one, obviously there's different questions worth and looking at. Obviously, fire and police, your number one job as being a city council person is to be able to take care of the citizens. So fire and police is pretty much whatever's going to happen there needs to happen, right? But then we get into transfer station and building permits, and we're talking about increases taking place on the 4th, which is tomorrow, which gives users of our services exactly 1 day to let their customers know that rates have changed. I'm not quite sure if that's the best model to use, and I'm just putting it out there because those services will have to be eaten by those providers. And we should at least give it a 45-day notice to that. I don't know if that's a notice, but then, from when fees are passed to when they take place. So that's concerning for me. And then water and sewer on their own budgets. On their own, both water and sewer have their own budget. They should not be lumped in under one fee increase. We should be looking at those individually. So I'm just putting it out there. It's hard for me to look at this because everything has got a different impact and where it's going to fit in place. So it's kind of difficult to look at these and just go, yeah, it's all right, let's do it. Because I can see, as far as the building side of things, that's what I do for a living, obviously, and we're running into a situation here now where interest rates are going to be 6-7%. We're pretty much all in a full recession, and you're looking at things that costs. You wonder if the timing's right for making fee increases. Now, if it's the arguments there that we have to make these fee increases to maintain the budget we passed last week, then that probably wasn't proper planning on our part to look at fees tonight and pass the budget last week if these fees are directly related to, the 6% increase we did with wages across the board. So that gets to be kind of complicated in my mind. So I'm kind of sitting here in a situation where I'm got a lot of questions, and I don't know if I've got enough time.
I think it's there's some fair points there, Shane, especially the timeline here on having people adjust. I think part of that was 2 weeks ago we tabled it.
Right.
Right?
That's fair. That's fair.
But just discussing this with Danny, there's nothing stopping us from changing the effective date or amending the effective date at this point to November 1st for all of these fees. And I think that might be a reasonable way to allow for some more adjustment period. But to your larger point of considering these all together, lumped together, I certainly understand that too. As you know, during the budget discussion, we talk about these different fees separately as they come to us, proposed to us in different budgets. So the discussion and the formulation of increases or adjustments takes place, several months prior to this. But, if it makes more sense to the council to address them separately when they're adopted in code, when those adjustments are adopted in code following the budget approval, that's certainly a conversation we can have as well.
I know fees have over the years have become a bigger part of the city's budget, a percentage of that city budget over the years. You know, we talk about sales tax, property tax, and then fees and services, and the lease with MPPD. So as of right now, fees are about what percentage of the city budget, Randy?
I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Right.
I'd have to take a look at the budget and see what percentage fees are. The utility funds are financed almost entirely.
Yeah, because you have to take utilities out of that particular, because general budget fees and services are different than the utilities. That's my point, I guess, I'm getting at. I got general budget fees, and we're lumping together. It's just, and Josh is I'm just kind of in a position where it's tough for me to look at both situations. Anyway, I know we're here tonight, which is unfortunate, because they need to be passed.
I think you make a good point about putting the effective date of this off until November. I think that only makes sense. Josh makes a good point, and the mayor makes a good point too, that these things were discussed during the budget reviews.
Right.
Individually and agreed upon. So I'm kind of split in the middle on this thing. I think going forward, I think we would certainly probably want to address this, council would want to address this next year.
Right.
On an individual basis. I certainly don't see anything wrong with that, but I definitely do agree that we should put the effective date off into the future.
I believe that would require an amendment to the ordinance before us to do that. Randy would be interested on your perspective of that, on any budget impact or any major adjustments needed to be made to the overall budget.
It will, of course, set the fee increase date back a month, which will, these fees don't come in evenly, so like the swimming pool receipts probably won't have any impact. Waste fees, for instance, those are coming in all the time, so that will have about a 1/12 impact of what those rate increases would be, but I think we can move that back if you want without having a major detrimental effect on the budget.
And you're right, Josh, tabling this has put us in a little bit of this situation, that we're in right now.
Further discussion? Is someone willing to make that amendment to advance the effective date to November 1st?
I'll propose, I'm just looking up the number, I'll propose amending ordinance number 5805 to include a November 1st start date for these fees.
Okay, motion and second on the amendment. Any discussion on that? Okay. Hearing none, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative, motion carries.
Okay. Back before us is the underlying ordinance as amended. Do I hear any further discussion or comments on that? Okay.
For me, I guess one last, Randy maybe can help me or not. I know that when creating the budget, you're looking at a 3.5% rate of growth or whatever's coming in, growing at 3.5%. Was this amendment or this accepting of these fees a big part of that, just part of that 3.5%, or was it, mostly looking at sales tax growth and property tax growth when the budget was set for especially for the 6% wage increase?
Sales tax growth is the lion's share of the increase in the revenue side of the budget.
Okay.
I was looking to answer your question on charges for services in the general fund are budgeted at about 2.6 million out of approximately 27.8 million general fund revenues. So it's a fairly significant portion of the budget, not the biggest share by any means, but
Right.
I can tell you what that percentage is here in a minute.
10%?
Yeah, a little under 10%, I believe. Yeah, about 9.4%.
Yeah. So with the increases in the fees, do you think it's about a 1% overall? Or
I
of that
don't think it'd be
particular-
that much.
be less than that?
The fees, the big fee increase we had in here was in the transfer station, which isn't in the general fund at all.
Right.
And then, I forget, Brianna, do you remember about how much we're thinking ambulance fees will go up? That's probably the big
Yeah.
share of,
Yeah, that's hard to determine though, based on what we actually get back in revenues on those. They don't totally.
Because the ambulance
match.
fees,
The revenue won't increase much with those.
those fees and stuff would all come out of general fund.
yes, that
Right, yeah.
charges for services is all general fund.
Right.
And a lot of those charges aren't affected by this fee ordinance, only specific ones. I haven't looked to see what makes that up. I assume that's charges like to other governments for, used to do dispatch, was now moved into its own separate fund. That used to be some fairly significant charges. I'd have to look at the detail of the budget to see what all affects that.
Yeah.
Ambulance fees, I know, is a big chunk of it, probably the biggest individual one in the general fund.
Right.
Again, I think to the larger point, Shane, these fees and proposals to adjust are discussed in the budget review sessions leading up to approval of the budget, but there might be justification in determining whether we want to change process-wise how they're approved or how those adjustments are in fact formalized within code. So I think that's a fair discussion to have. So the ordinance before us as amended with effective date of November 1st is on the floor. Is there any further discussion on what's before us? Okay, hearing none. Short title, please.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend Section 2-5 of the official city code to update ambulance fees, to update alarm fees, to update building, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing permit fees, to update subdivision plat approval fees, to update garbage and trash fees, to update water, sewer, stormwater, and wastewater rates and fees, to update zoning, district map, and conditional use permit fees, to update overnight camping fees and include a fee for miscellaneous recreational programs, to provide when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and to provide for the publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, please vote.
Voting in the affirmative, Granquist, Arns, Merrill, McCarthy, Murin, Jackson, Hildebrand. Voting in opposition, Clausen. Ordinance number 5805 carries on first reading.
Council, I would suggest to meet the effective date of November 1st that we pass on all three readings tonight.
Your Honor, I would propose that we suspend the rules and pass the ordinance on second and third.
Second.
Motion second to suspend the rules and approve on second and third readings. No further discussion. Please vote.
Voting in the affirmative, Granquist, Arns, Merrill, McCarthy, Murin, Jackson, Hildebrand. Voting in opposition, Clausen. Ordinance number 5805 carries on second and third.
Item number 20 would look for a motion to consider ordinance number 5804, amending section 2-5 of the city code to update ambulance fees, false alarm fees, building, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing permit fees, subdivision plat approval fees, garbage and trash fees, water, sewer, stormwater, and wastewater rates and fees, to update zoning, district map, and conditional use permit fees, and to restructure recreation fees. As a note, this ordinance was the one tabled at the September 19th, 2022 City Council meeting.
We have to take it
First
off
have
the
to
table first,
look
right?
for, yes, look for a motion to pull off the table, to remove
I'll
from
go
the
ahead
table.
and make a motion to take ordinance number 5804 off the table.
Second.
Motion second. If no discussion, please vote.
Voting in the affirmative, Granquist, Arns, Merrill, McCarthy, Murin, Jackson, Hildebrand. Voting in opposition, Clausen. Ordinance number 5804 is removed from the table.
And then I'll go ahead and make a motion for consideration of ordinance number 5804.
Second.
Okay, motion second. And again, Danny, remind us of where we are in this.
Yes, thank you. As I said previously, this is ordinance number 5804. We discussed it at the last meeting and it was tabled. This is very much so similar to the one that was just passed, with the exception of the fact that this ordinance had an October 1st effective date, and this ordinance contained a number of provisions, restructuring fees in the Parks and Recreation Department that were since changed by the ordinance that we adopted. The three remaining fees for Parks and Recreation that did stay in the one that we just voted were to remove the fees for the Liberty Bell pool, as that pool no longer exists. The second one is a fee range for our recreation programs, which it is my understanding that our new Parks and Rec director is implementing those within the next year or two. And then the third one was to raise prices out at Tahazuka for camping. So other than that, the other fees were contained in this ordinance that was tabled and just removed from the table 5804. And so because we just passed 5805, it would be my recommendation that the council would vote this one down.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Any further discussion? Hearing none, short title, please.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend Section 2-5 of the official city code to update ambulance fees, to update alarm fees, to update building, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing permit fees, to update subdivision plat approval fees, to update garbage and trash fees, to update water, sewer, stormwater, and wastewater rates and fees, to update zoning district map and conditional use permit fees, to restructure recreation fees, to provide when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and provide for the publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, please vote.
Voting in favor, none. Voting in opposition, Granquist, Arns, Merrill, McCarthy, Murin, Jackson, Clausen, Hildebrand. Ordinance number 5804 fails.
All right, that takes us to item 21. We'll look for a motion to consider approval to accept a low bid from Northern Truck Equipment Corporation, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, not to exceed $114,258 to purchase a new live floor transfer trailer for the transfer station.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Motion and second, and for some background on this, we will hear from Rob Mercer.
Good evening.
Evening.
The council authorized bids on August 1st of 2022 for this year's budget to go out for bid on trailers. We sent out 5 bid requests. We received 3. The low bid of not to exceed $114,000 from $114,258 from Northern Truck meets the bid specifications. $81,000 was budgeted. That number came from past history of purchasing trailers. The trailer could be as low as $105,118. The company did not know how to bid. Their supplier wanted a contingency of up to 8% increase due to costs. And so they just bid the total and worded it not to exceed $114,000. So it could still come in less. Answer any questions?
So you're saying it was budgeted at 81 and it's coming in at 114?
Yes,
So $33,000
yes.
over the budget?
There are several items on the budget that we would do without this year. Would be a grapple fork for a payloader for 14,000, a power washer, and a welder for 7,000. Power washer was 10,000.
And are there any changes you can make to your department to enable you to come up with another $33,000?
That's what we're going. We have in our budget 14,000 for a grapple fork, 10,000 for a power washer, and a welder for $7,000 that we will forego.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed, I think you said that, I missed that. Still enable you to do your work, foregoing those items?
Yes. Water pollution will supply the power washer when we need it.
Okay. And how many years do you think you'd be able to get along with that?
I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
Do you consider used trailers, or is it new, kind of the only route to go here?
We already own 7 used trailers. I wouldn't want to purchase the older ones, and that's the only from somebody to use. The trailers are top loaded anywhere in the country. They're top loaded, which means everybody dumps their garbage in it and they beat it in there. So in a matter of years, the trailer, there's just not much left.
You're buying someone else's
Yeah,
headache.
you're buying someone else's problems.
Okay.
Yep.
With the abuse that your trailers get, what is the, I guess, the maintenance schedule that you have on them, from the chassis underneath of them to
Once we get
to supports and welds and everything
we
else?
have no maintenance facility at all. Everything we do is outside. So our maintenance program is contingent on building our shed, so the wash bay in there, we'll be able to wash the underneath, wash the outsides, wash the road grime off of them. All the, other than that, maintenance is done monthly. We do brakes, adjustment, greasing, everything on the undercarriage is on a 4-week schedule, and everything on the outside is on a 4-week schedule.
With the fee increase tonight and the fact that the transfer station's getting a major overhaul, you know, and the beginning balance that they're gonna have at the end of this fiscal, 33,000, it's not gonna be a major issue for them at all, so.
Okay.
So the trailers never make it to a certified shop or even our own mechanic
Absolutely,
shop?
they do all, we don't change brakes, all of them will go to a certified shop for, wheel seals and brakes.
And that is a preventive maintenance, or when there's a problem?
When there's a problem. Brakes are preventative.
Any other questions or discussion, council? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Item 22 would look for a motion to consider approval to accept the low bid from RDO Truck Center, Norfolk, Nebraska for $133,961.71 to purchase a new over-the-road truck for the transfer station.
I'll make the motion for consideration.
Second.
Motion second, and Rob, once again, if you could give us some background on this, please.
Council also approved on August 1st for us to go out for bids on trucks. We sent out 4 bids, and that was only to Norfolk vendors. And 2 of them, their corporations would not allow them to bid because they could not get a truck within 12 months. to us. Two other International and RDO. International put in 2 bids using different engines, and RDO had 1 bid. And the low bid of $133,961.71 from RDO meets the bid specifications, and I will answer. This puts us on an 8-year rotation. Originally, when we started this back in 2015, when we started hauling, it was decided that the trucks would be put in an 8-year rotation. So we will have a new truck, a 8-year-old truck, and a 12-year-old truck going in rotation. And that's what this starts at.
And Rob, what was the budget then in August? The budget.
$130,000, and this came in at $133,000.
Okay, good.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. Thank you, Rob. Hearing none, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative, motion carries.
Item 23, would look for a motion to consider ordinance number 5806, authorizing issuance of various purpose bonds for permanent financing of paving District 519, Water Districts 124 and 126, and Sewer Districts 250 and 254, in the principal amount not to exceed $2,100,000.
I'd offer for consideration ordinance number 5806.
Motion and second. For some background on this, we'll hear from Randy Gates, our City Finance Officer.
Yes. You'll see on the next agenda item, we're calling $2,320,000 of outstanding bond anticipation notes, redemption on or around November 4th. This bond issue will give us most of the money we need to refund those bonds, bond anticipation notes. We've also got over $400,000 of cash in the special assessment fund from early payment of special assessments and the first installment of those special assessments. These districts were assessed back in May, and there's 50 days when they can pay these off with a discount and no interest. And so we have a number of people that take advantage of that, and that's why we wait until that 50-day period's up before we actually size the bond issue that we use for the permanent financing on these. This will be done as a competitive sale with Piper Sandler acting as the city's finance advisor. The ordinance provides that interest rates will be based on the successful bidder submission, not to exceed a true interest cost of 5% and principal of $2.1 million. Maturity won't exceed 20 years, and the bonds will have a 5-year call. Bruce Leffler is here from Piper Sandler, and either he or I can answer your questions if you have any.
Randy, these particular paving, water and sewer districts are related to new housing developments, is that correct? Or was this a mix of housing and commercial?
The majority of these were for Legacy Bend, and that was the sewer district. Oh, I'd have to look, but that's most of them. And then there was another small residential one, and I believe these were all residential. I know paving district 519 and 254 and 126 were Legacy Bend, 250 was Porsche Place, and then we've got water on South Highway 81, which was Sewer District 124. So there may be some commercial in that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or discussion, council? Okay. Hearing none, short title, please.
An ordinance authorizing the issuance of general obligation various purpose bonds, Series 2022 of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, in the principal amount of not to exceed $2 $2,100,000 for the purpose of financing or refinancing the cost of constructing street improvements in a paving district number 519, sewer improvements in sewer extension district numbers 250 and 254, and water improvements in water extension district numbers 124 and 126, prescribing the form of said bonds, providing for the levy and collection of taxes to pay the same, authorizing officers of the city to award the sale of the bonds to the bidder providing the most favorable bid to the city at public sale, authorizing officers of the city to make arrangements for the sale of the bonds and to designate the final terms, rates, and maturity schedule for said bonds within written stated parameters, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, thank you. Please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Ordinance number 5806 carries on first reading.
I'd recommend this be passed on second and third so we can get this sale underway.
I'd like a motion to suspend the rules of second and third.
Second.
Motion second to suspend the rules and approve on second and third readings. If no further discussion, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Ordinance number 5806 carries on second and third.
Item 24 would entertain a motion to consider Resolution 2022-52, calling $2,320,000 of outstanding Series 2021 bond anticipation notes for redemption on or around November 4th, 2022.
I'll make a motion for consideration of resolution number 2022-52.
Second.
Motion and second. Randy, anything to add on this? No, this is just, as I mentioned earlier, the notes that we now have, know what we're getting dollars in for, and they're ready to call. So I'd recommend passage of this resolution.
Thank you, Randy. Any discussion, council? Hearing none, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Resolution 2022-52 is adopted.
Item 25 would look for a motion to consider ordinance number 5807 to amend sections 25-1, 25-2, 25-3, and 25-9 of the city code to require prior written approval from the city through a permit process to plant or remove any trees or shrubs in the terrace, to require approval as to what species of tree can be planted in the terrace and the proposed location thereof, and to remove the prohibition of planting a tree closer than 5 feet to the back of the curb.
I'll offer for consideration ordinance number 5807.
Motion and second, and to hear background on this, we'll hear from Nate Powell, our Park and Recreation Director.
Mayor and Council, thank you. As discussed, we're talking about the tree ordinance and the updates. I'll kind of give you a background on what prompted this. Right now, it's currently unlawful or not permitted to plant a tree within 5 feet of the curb, which is in the terrace. That's the vast majority of terrace in residential neighborhoods. At the most, you might have 8 feet, so you're forcing a tree within 2 or 3 feet of that sidewalk. And we want to be more in the middle. And the current ordinance does not allow for that. It's also not followed in downtown. Brosh Avenue, new communities like Legacy Bend have trees within that 5 feet requirement. So we're already putting trees within that 5 feet. But if we lift this, we want to make sure that we offer the assistance to the homeowner. We want to make sure that we can help them find a suitable location for that tree. We want to make sure they pick the right variety so there's not interfering with sidewalks, curbs, power lines, underground utilities, sewer lines, line of sight issues on corners, traffic signals and signs, and the proper spacing with speed limits. And the arborist will help them navigate all those requirements with these ordinance changes that we have. The help would be in 25-1 A and B. And the removal of the 5 feet requirement would be 25-3-3. And the other edits were just minor.
So are the selections pretty broad for trees?
Oh yeah, or what you can put there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have we're working with the state on that tree list. There will be power line friendly trees and everything else. Yep, and we want to make sure they're not diseased trees. I also have, I'll just run through the other cities too, just so we have that too. North Platte, the city has removal authority given, it's for the city. Columbus authorizes, you have to get authorization from the city to cut and a permit needed to plant. Papillion, removal authority given to the city. Planting permitted with a specific tree list. Hastings, there's a permit required to plant or remove any terrace tree or shrub. Fremont, same thing, permit required. Kearney, permit required. Grand Island, city controls removal, has a recommendation for tree variety and location. And then Bellevue has a permit requirement for pruning, and the city maintains the right to plant, prune, or remove trees. So it's in line with all the other cities.
So if I want to remove a couple trees and I call and say, hey, there's some trees in my terrace, I'm not a fan of these trees, and I have to get a permit to remove, can that permit be denied?
Off some guidelines from the tree board, I can't say for sure what they would say. If it's a healthy tree and something that's maybe not an ash tree or something.
Sure.
I mean, if it's an ash tree, you want to remove it. But if it's a healthy maple, I don't know what the tree board would say, but I would just suspect that might get denied, unless there's an underlying reason, like it's lifting the sidewalk or messing with utilities or any of those items. Yeah.
So any current trees are not being removed or have to be removed by any means, right?
Nope, not at all. Yeah.
So, in essence, Nate, this allows more flexibility for people to plant within the terrace, because right now, under existing code, with those distance parameters, it's almost impossible to legally plant within the terrace.
That's correct.
Correct.
It's almost impossible to do anyway, because if we approve 5-foot sidewalks now, we only have 15-foot setbacks with the right of way. You're talking about 9 foot of room. So now you're going to put the tree at 4 foot.
Legacy
you're going to have to stay 5 foot away.
Legacy Bend has 8 feet. They're putting them right about 4.5 feet.
But they're saying 5 foot back of curve on here.
But this would remove that prohibition.
Yeah, it's prohibited in Legacy Bend, but they're doing it anyways.
Okay. So we would allow people to plant within.
That's correct.
Yeah, right.
So how, in a percentage of people that are a homeowner, percentage of people, how many people do you think are actually going to be calling and asking permission before they plant the tree, if we approve it or not?
So the hope would be to start a re-tree program, get some grant dollars to actually give $100 reimbursement to actually plant a tree in the terrace and encourage that. So you can do that with hopefully with grant funds. Or a program that we develop within the city.
Then how are we going to let people know that there's a $100 grant out there if you come to the city and you can pick a tree from this list?
We would have that on our website and work with Nick in communications.
Again, my point being is how many people are going to be coming to our website to make sure they can plant a tree? I mean, we have a hard enough time with people coming to the website. I get calls and I'll direct them to the website, and some will say, I didn't even know you had all of this on the website. So I guess I'm having a little bit of an issue with a percentage of people that are really going to follow through with this if they don't know the $100 grant is there, and what trees they can plant.
I think that's fair, Corey. The Tree City USA group had a conference here in Norfolk a couple weeks ago that I attended, and several cities, as Nate went through the list, have these kinds of codes on the books, and also incentive programs to increase their tree canopies, especially street trees, to help mitigate runoff and things like that. So they do these incentives, work with groups like the Arbor Day Foundation, Nebraska Forest Service, to utilize these resources to incentivize people to do it. But to your point exactly, if people don't know about it, they're not going to do it. Now having an arborist and a forestry service within Parks and Rec, it'll be their jobs to make sure that people know about these programs and their ability to utilize them to plant trees if they wish to in their terrace area.
I think it's probably good to point out too, that like we did with the sprinkler ordinance we passed here last year,
Mhm.
you know, those folks that are installing those are trying to get people to, depending on what side of the street they live on, to water on certain days of the week, right? I think you could do the same thing with local retailers. They're certainly going to be able to help the public, say, go to this web address, you can get some help here, you can get a grant here.
Okay.
These are the types of trees I can show you.
Yeah.
Right down this aisle, what things are available.
I can give you, in Mitchell, we had, 25 to 50 a year putting in trees and using the program in a town of 15,000. So,
There's a lot more than 25 or 50 people putting trees in a year's time. I'm playing both sides of this card here.
yeah, no, I meant for using a retree program. If they're not calling us and not letting us know, we just won't know.
Okay. And then if your tree is, if I really want a tree and I come to you and I say, hey, I really want this tree, and are you gonna, is there a variance of the trees you can put in there if it's not on the list? Is it a hard no?
The hard no is on diseased trees or trees that are just not going to do well in the environment that we're looking at.
Okay, but then there's trees that have different root systems, and you're well aware of this, but
Yep.
they're going to break up the street, they're going to break up sidewalks and curbs and everything else as well.
Those we would put in friendly trees that do not do that.
Okay.
I think it's the program. I think there's some real merit to it. The biggest issue I have is having to get a permit to remove a tree from my property. I think that to me is an overreach. But everything else I think makes sense with working with the citizens to find the right trees to go in that set, because there's not much room there.
Yeah.
And to get the right tree planted there. Would it be something, because it's so new to Norfolk, that we could try in the overlay districts right away and see how that pans out for people and how it works before it becomes and if it's not something that's working well or whatnot, then in a couple of years, you go back and look at it and say, hey, maybe this is a great idea. Let's try it on the main thoroughways. And then year after that, I say, hey, people are getting used to this, and we move it to throughout the state. The city. It's just a thought.
I think there's an extreme amount of flexibility there on removal. It's mainly like on Brosh Avenue, when we plant the trees, we don't want the landowner right next to it come out and cut it down the next day and say, I don't want a tree here.
Right.
I mean, what's the point of planting if you're just going to allow them to cut it down? So, there's just some guidelines that I think we need to create with the tree board to make sure that we have a fair process for that.
But I think like with certain, like Brosh, I think when you're putting in a tree, you have a contract with we're putting a tree in.
Yeah.
You maintain it. But I'm talking about buying an existing house. I got a tree I don't like. I want it out of there because my kid backs out of the driveway and you can't see. I want to tear it down. I don't want to come into the city and ask for a permit to tear down a tree in my own yard. That to me is kind of overreach. But everything else in this, I think makes good sense. It's good. That's just how I would look at it.
Thank you.
But I deal in a world of permits and pulling permits. That's what I do. So I can see I'm a little bit biased sometimes when it comes to that. So.
Well, again, I think as Nate said, a major motivation for this was on some of those relatively new city infrastructure projects like Brosh, and you'll see on Benjamin. We've put an emphasis on putting trees in where we can, and that's not just for the sake of planting trees, but there is runoff mitigation benefits. There's infrastructure preservation benefits that comes with that. There's walkability and traffic calming benefits. So all of those, I think, are seen as creating public benefit. Again, I don't think this policy is meant to be create any kind of hardship on people. And as was said before, right now, technically, if you wanted to plant a tree in the terrace, you couldn't lawfully in many places in the terrace, and this fixes that.
I do have a comment too. I agree with Shane on the removal of the tree. I'm not a real fan of that permit. Is this just between the sidewalk and the street that permit
I
applies
believe that's
to?
how the terrace is defined.
That's
in city
terrace,
code.
public right of way, yes.
Okay, so with no sidewalk, what's the answer there? Because there's several lots that have no sidewalk. Do you need to get a permit to cut the tree down in your front yard?
Within the terrace, I don't know what it's defined at from the sidewalk. It'd have to be in the right of way, I
Yeah,
guess.
most of our streets are 60-foot right-of-ways. So you take away the street, there's about 15-foot to 16-foot of lawn, typically from your lot pins to the curb. So if you didn't have a sidewalk, you'd have 16-foot roughly to worry about, or would have to be, you'd have to call the city or get a permit to remove. So it's roughly the same in either neighborhood, I suppose.
Does that go for your backyard as well?
No.
If you had an alley? Just front,
This is just a
just
terrace.
the street?
I'd point out again to be mindful that a lot of these trees that were planted along streets were done so for a purpose many years ago. A lot of the mature trees that we have in the community, if you look at older residential neighborhoods, there are trees planted there, and they were planted for a reason. They were planted to establish a tree canopy, and again, that creates the public benefit of infrastructure preservation and runoff mitigation. So I think that's important to keep in mind in a policy like this.
I don't know if they used as much thought into the root system as we're probably giving it now. I see more problems with streets and sidewalks.
If you go to Nate's point, identifying the right species as street trees is very possible. If you go to a lot of cities across the U.S., there are Charlotte, North Carolina, a great example. There are trees everywhere along the street. It's not like it can't be done. It's done in a lot of places.
I'm saying that the current ones, I think, probably didn't have that thought in the process, which I think we do now with the root systems.
Nate, on a denial to remove a tree, is there a process then for that person to come before a board or perhaps the council to plead their case?
We could certainly do that with the tree board.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Any other questions or discussion?
I think 90% of this thing is perfect. I think that calling in to have to get a permit to remove a tree, granted, I'm talking about existing, not new stuff that you just put in for new roads and stuff, but having to call in to get a permit, that's the only thing that's hanging me up a little bit.
Right, the removal part.
Everything else is great, because I could see the city establishing a tree farm with this.
Right.
And having trees, that we could work with the community, and it could really become a very positive.
That's always been a goal of, I mean, not always, but for many years, it's been a goal of ours to do exactly that, and I think that's a great idea.
Like, this is where this would lead,
Yeah.
I think.
But I also think that having the ability to come back to someone else on a denial is probably a good idea, and I'm kind of like you, 90% of it is just great. I think if we had that ability for someone to come back in front of the tree board or in front of the council or even maybe Val's office, I think that, in my mind, takes it up to about 97%, so I'd be pretty much in favor of that.
Nate, with this, is that naturally part of the process if someone seeks to remove a tree in this specific area, coming to apply for a permit, they would, I'm guessing, naturally have a conversation with Parks and Rec and planning on that request, right?
Absolutely, yep. We would take it to they would have my office first, but then we would take it to the tree board after that if we feel like this is a tree that shouldn't come out. And hopefully we have a good reason for that at that time.
Okay. Any other discussion, questions? Sure.
Jim McKenzie, 1412 Longhorn Drive. As I was reading this ordinance, I was trying to figure out what the process is for the approval, disapproval. Does the citizen get a permit application? I didn't see anything about a permit. It's got to be approved through either the Parks and Rec director or the arborist, but I don't see anything about a permit, so I don't understand the process. So does the citizen have to come and get a permit application? And then does the park staff have to come visit the site and measure and do that process? And then later on, do they issue a permit? And then you can't plant your tree until you have a permit. I mean, I don't understand. There's nothing in here which really defines what that process is. And then that process takes time. So what are the staff hours and the costs for every single one of those? In a tough economic environment, we're adding more regulation and more cost to city government. So the city's survived for 150 years without this, and we haven't had any huge issues that I'm aware of, and yet now we have new regulation, more costs. The other thing I don't see is what are the criteria that the park staff use for approval or disapproval? Right now it seems completely subjective. I like this tree, I don't like this tree. You want to cut down a tree, well, that's a pretty tree, so you can't cut down that tree. I mean, if you're going to have an ordinance, you ought to have the criteria identified in there about why you allow or disallow that tree to be cut down, or why you allow or disallow that tree to be planted. There's nothing in here which has the criteria that should be in there as far as can you do this or can you not do this. I would recommend that we vote this down or table it or something so that you can identify that better. And to say that I can't cut down a tree in front of my house because I don't like it and I want to put a different tree up there because somebody says I can't seems kind of overreaching. And I don't see anything in here about any process for escalation. He talked about going to the tree board. There's nothing in here about escalation to the tree board. And tree board's not an elected body anyway, so that escalation to me doesn't make sense if that was to be happening. So it's very subjective. You got two people who are going to make those decisions without any criteria. That to me doesn't make sense. That's what
Just quickly answering the form, it's a simple form that you can fill out online or call and request, and we would if you're requesting to plant a tree, we would have them do a locate before an arborist would come out and approve the location and sign off on the permit. It's not a long process or anything like that. It's pretty simple. And then as far as generally what are the requirements for moving trees? Is it bothering utilities, sewer lines, sidewalks, streets, curbs? If it's disturbing any of those things, those are all automatic. You can take out that tree if you need to do that. It would only be, is it a city planted tree? Is it, is it a homeowner planted tree? Does it have disease issues that we need to deal with, or is it dying? Those are all easy things to say, yes, you can take out the tree, and you can list them all out, but everything's going to be different in almost every scenario. We can't get them all into an ordinance. So.
Nate, you had mentioned several communities across Nebraska that already have ordinances like this. I imagine that we used some of those as models for writing this code.
I listed all the cities that actually have North Platte, Columbus, Papillion, Hastings, Fremont, Kearney, Grand Island, and Bellevue all control the removal of those trees.
And Nate, there's no charge for a permit?
No charge.
Upon request, how long would it take the arborist to get to that location? Guessing.
As long as she's there that day, probably within an hour or two.
I called her for the area up there by our church, and she was out there like half an hour later. She told me how many trees they could plant in there. So a lot of it's common sense.
This is what she does every day.
She prevails.
Yeah. Right. So I think Jim has a couple valid points there. One, talking about costs and what the costs are incurred. I'm thinking this is part of the normal job of our arborists, so our costs are there. Am I thinking correctly on that? And the form is really no cost other than review. Who's reviewing that form?
If the form comes in, it automatically will go to our arborist.
So the arborist is doing it. So the point of the appeal process, and maybe even the idea of how the time frame that an arborist would assess that situation should maybe be addressed in the same ordinance. You know, lay out what that appeal process would be, and then maybe lay out that the arborist has 24 hours to respond from a permit, something like that, just so it's in a more defined realm. I think there's probably some abilities to make it a little bit better. I have no problem with this. I can totally understand city spending money planting trees and trying to protect those from being cut down immediately after they've been planted. I understand that. That's where we're going with the having permission to cut down more than we are of not allowing somebody just because it's a nice tree that we like, but they don't. We could probably add some sort of idea of the size or nature of those trees, you know, what we're looking for in that ordinance, rather than having it maybe up to speculation. You know, obviously a cottonwood is not necessarily a good tree in a terrace, but height, depending on root size, depending on, you know, how wide those trees get. I mean, obviously I don't know enough about trees, but maybe we could make the ordinance a little bit better before we follow through.
And we already are making these decisions, and we haven't had any trouble. I mean, we've removed trees already this year in terraces that the city's planted before and made calls, and homeowners have asked us to look at it. We looked at it, and we agreed, took them out. And so we already do this. It's just not under city code.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously we have legacy bent planting trees that's not technically legal right now. But thinking of the future and how many of us, I mean, we're all going to leave at some point in our positions, right? Whether that's retirement or just off of council. So thinking of what this might look like for future city council or parks and rec or arborists, whatever that might be, of having a more defined code.
I see where you're coming from, Corey. I would, I'm guessing here because I didn't look at these other communities' ordinances, but I would be very surprised if any of those define out required response time by a city arborist. I guess I look at it like we have a city planner who her job is to respond to application, like a conditional use permit application. Job is to respond to that in a timely manner. I don't think we have it in code that says Val has to respond to that request within 24 hours or something like that. You know, I think it's a natural part of doing good business that we trust people hired to do jobs to do them in a timely fashion. I think if we tried to put into code employee response times on things, we'd have code that's probably about 5 times longer than it is today.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from there. Especially, I guess, if somebody's on, say, a week-long vacation. I understand that.
Nate,
But an appeal process is probably something that we could look at.
I think, like I said before, I think the appeal process is pretty good. But I mean, the arborist is hired to do just exactly what we're asking them to do in this code. And if I sat here and thought we were going to be, or that person was going to be either planting or removing thousands and thousands of trees a year, we might have something else to talk about. But I don't think, given the history of trees that are going in and coming out of the community, that that's going to be overtaxing that person's job.
I don't think so. And Our job is customer service too. We wanna make sure that the homeowners are happy with what is decided. You know, not every time, but, like you said, if there's an appeal process that with the tree board, that would be a good way for us to start that.
Okay.
Nate,
All right.
you did. Well, I guess
Go
one of
ahead,
the
Gary.
questions I have is, isn't this city property, the terrace?
There's public
So I guess
right of way.
Why are we
Yeah.
going through all this discussion when it's gonna happen? It's city property.
Because if I got a tree on my yard, they send me a letter every now and then saying, I gotta get it cut 14 foot above the street.
It's in the terrace.
Well,
It's a city property.
okay, but my point is, I have to do that. Okay, so,
You gotta mow it, you gotta water it.
Right.
You gotta take care of it.
but my question was, or my point was, you already said you're working on a list of trees that would fit there. So, I mean, it's not to address what Corey was asking or saying, I think, is, it wouldn't be an issue of which tree. They would give you a list of, when you applied or said you wanted to put a tree there, they'd give you a list of saying, here's what will work there. Right?
Yeah.
No.
And that's why an arborist was hired within Parks and Rec. And I know that's a new thing for Norfolk, but it's not new in a lot of cities across the country.
I think the removal part is gonna be the tough part. Just because of people's schedules and how busy some of the tree removal services are, you can get, if they know you're on the list for removal, and all of a sudden they call you, hey, I've got an opening, we've got a rain day over here, I can't get out there, it's muddy, I can come and remove your tree today. Oh, you know what, I got a pull permit for this to move my tree. I think that is for me, that's a big hangup. Otherwise, I think it's fine. I can look at 3 trees in my neighborhood right now that are big, tall trees that someday need to come down, and but I have to go in and get a permit to pull a tree. I just don't. I understand your protected areas, the new areas like Brosh, like you're stating, perfect sense. But there should be a contract already in place for those people not to remove those trees because they just got planted there. But existing tree in my lawn, I'm sorry, that one, that to
But
me is
is lawn, again, to Thad's point, it's
but like
not necessarily your lawn, it's the public right of way in your
But I'm
lawn. The
taking
terrace
care-
is
I'm
what
taking-
we're talking about.
Ultimately, I'm taking care of it, and I'm replacing the sidewalk when it goes bad, and
Right.
even though that's so the part about finding a tree, helping me place a tree, that's great because right now, people go out and measure off, and that's a great service to go out there and say, hey, put this tree, you got 20 trees that are great in these environments. We need to set it. That makes, because right now people ask me sometimes, hey, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I, right? It'd be great to have that service for somebody to come out and say, hey, everything goes right here, and this is what you need to do. It's great. The permitting part for removal is iffy.
Yep. Well, a lot of trees are also planted with grant funds, and we don't want them taking those out either. So those are
Right. Again, those would be in the new areas, new roads, right away. Right, we're putting in trees, we're beautifying those areas. Here's what it says: you cannot remove this tree. We just placed it there. I'm talking about old neighbors, existing neighborhoods. I'm not talking about the new stuff. So I think that revision should take place in this code, honestly. But that's where I'm coming from. So.
Well, is there a rush to get this done? Approved? I mean, the removal part is hard for me too. I mean, I like the whole thing except for that part, forcing them, so is there a rush on this? Can it be tabled? To change that?
Good, okay. I would just urge everyone, we could do that. We could table that and then come back, and I think probably end up having the same discussion 2 or 4 weeks from now. If you feel it's terribly onerous to ask someone to come in for a permit or fill out a permit and talk with our arborist about removing a tree in the public right of way, that's fine. I've heard people say 90% of this is good, 10% I have questions with. We make votes on those kinds of policies all the time. Not everybody likes 100% of what's in there. But again, I would just remind you to be mindful. This was an ordinance based on a lot of other communities who have done this before, and there's reasons for it. I think a majority portion of the reasoning for the removal process was to target those specific areas like Brosh, where there's been city expense put in new trees, and we'd like to keep them there, right? And I think the minority, the few examples where there's hardship trees that need to be removed in a public right-of-way terrace, I know our parks director, I know our arborists, I think they're pretty reasonable people. I think customer service is a priority. I think we'll work well with our citizens on things like this. I think maybe we're thinking a little too hard about all this.
Don't we also, as a council, have the priority to, we see this is not working, bring this ordinance back
Right.
to look at it and make changes?
We absolutely do.
And that's a good point as well. This is a very problematic area, this portion. It can always be changed after the fact.
But I still don't necessarily see an appeal process laid out in the current ordinance.
Well, there may not be one laid out, but I think that in the idea of giving good customer service, and with Nate's agreement that needs to be in there, I think we can trust him and the arborist to come up with something that does work. Secondarily to that, Thad's point, if we don't like the way that reads, I don't imagine we're going to be inundated with denials between the time that's written and we look at it again. If we don't like it, we can ask them to rewrite it. But I would tend to agree with Josh. It's not an onerous ordinance. It actually, I'll go back to that 90% thing. There's more good, there's a heck of a lot more good about it than there is bad. And I'm not even so sure that the bad is all that bad. But I think that let these folks have the ability to write that in there, and we'll take a look at it, and I would just assume, with good customer service in mind, that we'd be happy with it. And if we're not, we can do something about it at a later date. Now, it's also important to point out that there are not going to be a lot of trees planted between now and the spring of next year. So I think we have plenty of time to look at this.
Thinking about this too, I wonder just exactly how many old trees there are existing in public right-of-ways and terraces across town. I don't think it's a lot compared to the overall tree population.
I have one.
Yeah.
My ward, there's a lot.
There's more than.
There's a bunch, yeah.
We could also just pass this on first reading tonight also, and leave it at that. If you want to have more discussion on it or have more comments, council can talk to staff and we can make a decision on second and third later on.
That wouldn't help you in the process of possibly amending it. If I was going to say, let's lay out something in the appeal process, passing it on first would just maybe that's more my question is that if it would pass on first and we come back with an amendment to this, would we have to revert back, or could we? We'd have to, right? If you amended it, then you'd have to go back to first reading, but you could do that on the same day as it was in front of you on second reading.
I've been taking notes based on the conversation here and the kind of changes to the existing ordinance, the proposed ordinance that you are looking for, that some of you are looking for. And I think based on the nature of those amendments, that's really a substantive change. It's not something as simple as crossing off here, adding a word here that's going to keep the same nature, if you will. So I think that the best thing to do would be to do a vote tonight. If it passes, it passes on first, or if it passes on first, it passes on first. If it fails, then I think staff has pretty clear direction on what to bring back. And this could even go to another subcommittee to discuss the notes that I've taken here and the minutes that are reflected by these conversations tonight. So the easiest thing to do, rather than vote to put it to table it and pull it off the table, is to do a straightforward vote tonight and see what happens.
Let me ask a question here first, Jim. But so then if it did pass, then we could still amend it before a second reading. Am I thinking correctly?
And then we would have to bring it back. So what would happen is, so if we passed it, then on first reading, and we could come back again, have discussion, but if it was a substantive enough change, we would have to bring it back for a whole nother meeting. It wouldn't be something that, sorry, maybe I didn't answer it specifically.
No, I was just,
It wouldn't be something, based on what I'm hearing, that some of you want from this amendment, it wouldn't be something that we could just do on the record. We'd have to kind of rework the ordinance.
And this is related to the budgetary side of it, but when you guys passed 5805 and denied 5804, it looks like all of your recreational cost adjustments were in 5804, and they're not in 5805. So that means you don't have any of your recreational cost increases anymore. So you eliminate all those. Are we aware of that? I mean, that was not discussed at all, I guess.
I think we passed 5804, denied 5805.
Pardon?
I think we passed 5804.
No, you passed 5805.
The recreational fees were removed.
Yeah, right.
All the cost adjustments for rec were removed. So there are no cost adjustments for rec.
That is my
So
understanding.
why did you remove all those?
That was the, yes.
Why were those removed?
Because there's, Andy stated they're working.
We want to have an opportunity to talk to our teams and our sports groups and associations in town before we approve the fees. We want to have those conversations and then have the results of those conversations with the city council.
Okay. Be nice if you could tell the public that when you're doing this, that you had those proposed and then you removed them all.
I think I did. I believe I did.
I believe that
That
he
was
did.
mentioned, and we'd
You
like
may have
to.
missed it, but he did.
I missed that, okay.
I'd like to
Yeah.
stay on task with the current matter, please.
All right, thank you.
Okay, here we are. So, okay, I'm just going to ask this one more time. So, we didn't pull this policy out of thin air, right, Nate? This was modeled. These other communities that you listed, most first-class cities in Nebraska, have this in code. Do they have the same removal permit removal requirements?
That's correct. These ordinances are to protect trees in the city right away.
To protect trees in the city right away.
From there.
That is the primary purpose for that policy, correct? Okay. Are there also, within any of these codes, do you know, are there built-in appeal processes for protesting a permit, removal permit denial? Is that addressed in code anywhere or not?
In my experience, that's usually with the Parks and Recreation Board.
Okay, which is what we're suggesting here, what we're proposing here. Okay. In your opinion, would you say we're maybe overcomplicating this by adding more provisions to it?
That's correct, because there's many reasons to take out trees, and generally they're calling because there's a problem, and you have to allow that.
And we hired an arborist specifically to help remedy that problem, correct?
We plant a tree this year, and a new homeowner comes in next year and wants to remove it when we just planted it. You just don't want to see those kinds of scenarios.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the staff time put into modeling this policy. I will note too that it went through a subcommittee process. Is that right? That a subcommittee of the city council approved this going forward to the full council?
Yep.
Okay. Right. And which subcommittee was that? Parks and Recreation? Culture and Rec. Okay. All right. Any other questions or discussion? If not, short title, please.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend Section 25-1, 25-2, 25-3, and 25-9 of the official city code to require prior written approval from the city through a permit process to plant or remove any trees or shrubs in the terrace, to require approvals as to what species of tree can be planted in the terrace and the proposed location thereof, to remove the prohibition of planting a tree closer than 5 feet to the back of the curb, to provide when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and to provide for the publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, please vote.
Voting in the affirmative, Granquist, Arns, Merrill, McCarthy, Murin, Jackson. Voting in opposition, Clausen and Hildebrand. Ordinance number 5807 carries on first reading.
Okay, with that, that is the last item on the council agenda. We are adjourned for the night. Thank you.